Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Hello? Are you going to introduce us? Hey, back off, man. It's not always about you. Okay, so who is it about? Is it about you? No, it's not about me. It's not about me, man. Back off, okay? What is the point of this? What are you doing? Today, it's all about a very special person. Oh my God, is it Mother's Day already? I forgot. Today, it's all about Dr. Death, as played by by the man whose name is on screen right now, okay? Alright, I see where this is going. All the stories in this episode are read by Dr. Death, so get ready for cryptid stories told by Dr. Death, starting now.
Grandma Meets a Werewolf is told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. My grandmother was in vaudeville back when she was a kid and a teenager. She performed with her parents as a family act. They never rose high in the billing, and by the time she had grown up, the act wasn't getting booked at all anymore. She married an insurance salesman over harsh protests from her parents, and she settled down to raise my mom and then to be the grandma that I knew. Every once in a while, she would pull out an old show business story. The time either Wheeler or Woolsey made a pass at her, the time Chico Marx asked her for a loan and Harpo wanted her not to do it. But my favorite of her vaudeville stories didn't have much to do with show business at all. That's because my favorite story Grandma used to tell was the story of the time in 1916 when she claimed she saw an actual werewolf. When Grandma first started performing, she was only 5 years old. She would do comedy and play percussion when her parents sang. As she got older, the act became more and more about her. The family were often asked to come to dinner and stay over with well-to-do individuals who had seen them perform. It was always much better than the seedy hotels they stayed in when they could afford to stay inside at all, so they always accepted. Because Grandma was a cute kid, people naturally wanted to take care of her, and her parents capitalized on that. As Grandma grew into her teen years, however, they found out that not only did the act not work as well, but they got invited to dinner by the audience members far less often. When they did get asked to socialize, by that point, it was mostly creepy guys looking to get her alone. One night, soon after Grandma's 16th birthday, this guy seemed like a gentleman, invited her dad and mom to dinner at his place and said the family could stay over. All went well through dinner, but sure enough, he snuck into her bedroom that night and tried to get handsy. Grandma says she screamed for her parents, and the guy got really mad. He threw them and their luggage out of the house, with the three of them still in their sleeping clothes. They got dressed as well as they could right there in front of the man's house, then began the long walk back to the train station. Her father wanted to sleep in the station and get the first train to the next town they were booked to perform in. Her mother wanted them to get a room in the hotel near the station. Their quarreling got increasingly heated, but the night got colder and colder. They had been walking on a dirt road near the edge of a forest. Now Grandma noticed that the forest was still there, but she still wasn't sure in the darkness where the road had gone. Her parents were too busy saying hurtful things to each other to have noticed that they might not be heading in the right direction any longer. She told me this story 3 different times, and the facts were slightly different each version. I would guess I was there for the retelling of this story in 1971, 1972, and either 73 or 74. She died in 1975 at the age of 75, which was old back then. Her memory at the end might have been a little off, and my own memory may be playing tricks on me when I remember this, but in every version of the story, the next thing that happens is she looks towards the woods, and right there, in the first row of trees, she sees an incredibly large, hairy man with the head of a feral dog. She gasped and hid behind her father, who immediately got out the pistol he carried for self-defense. He began shouting toward the forest, and my grandmother realized that her father thought it was a guy from back at the house where they had dinner. She tried to explain to him that it was something else, something larger and more terrifying than that guy. Her father called to the woods angrily, demanding that whoever was there show himself. This was the last thing my grandmother wanted to happen. She pulled her father and mother's clothes, trying to get them to leave that area. Grandma said that they could see a shadow in the trees, and she thought it was going to come out and show itself, as her father had commanded. Instead, it howled. Grandma says her father and mother both went pale when they realized that she was right, and it was not a man at all pursuing them, but a giant carnivorous beast. They tried to move away toward the station as quickly as they could, but they were all carrying luggage, and women wore a lot more clothes back in those days. It was this whole thing. So the going was not very fast. Grandma told us she knew what it wanted was her. She also realized that if a beast that large and savage wanted her, it could have her, and there was nothing her parents could do about it. She was going to have to depend on luck, or the dogman deciding not to take her for whatever reason. They still had over an hour of walking to get to the train station or any kind of civilization at all. Just then, a voice called out to them from their right. Squinting in that direction, she could make out light from lamps. They quickly headed in that direction and realized the calls were coming from an old man who was driving a wooden cart with his horse. He said he saw they had wandered off the road and wanted to warn them to steer clear of those woods at night. He told them that lots of folks wander off the road at night and are never heard from again. Grandma says she begged the man to give them a lift to the train station, but he had just come from that direction and had no need to go back till the next day. Finally, they offered him the amount they would have paid to stay at the hotel to carry them to safety, and he agreed. The 3 of them rode in the wooden cart in the back, watching the road behind them. Grandma said the moon was setting behind the trees and it was getting darker and harder to see. After a while, though, she started to hear sounds which seemed to indicate that they were perhaps being followed. It was all on one side, to her right, the side she'd seen the dogman on. Grandma called to the driver to please drive faster. He argued that he was going as fast as he was getting paid to go, but he was interrupted by a loud growl coming from the darkness. "Yes, ma'am, I'll drive her faster." They held on tight as the speeding cart bumped up and down and side to side all over the dirt and stone road. Grandma says that as loud as the horse and cart got, she could still hear the thing following them in the woods. And then she saw it. They all saw it. Brazenly running right down the center of the road behind them was the hairy, dog-headed man she had seen earlier. You could see him for a second in the dim light provided by the lamps. Then he'd disappear back into the darkness, only to emerge again as he gained on them. He was even taller than Grandma had realized earlier. She said he was an insane feral caveman with a dog head. I remember asking her why she called it a caveman. Did it wear clothes? She said, no. Did it have long hair like a caveman? She said no. It had dog-length hair, whatever she meant by that. Grandma seemed to feel that this was something prehistoric, and it had the basic body shape of a man. So I guess to her, that meant it was a caveman or proto-human. So where was I? Oh, right. The dogman was now openly running after their cart. She could see it had dark gray fur, darker and lighter in various areas, and that its eyes glowed like they were lit by candles. Even when it would fall back into darkness, you could still see the eye shine for a while after the body was completely in darkness. The monster snarled and snapped at them, making it very clear its intentions toward them were of the worst kind. Grandma said it had claws on its fingers and toes, but seemed like a furry man other than that, and the head. It ran like a man, on 2 legs. She said it never dropped to 4 legs. It was walking or running bipedally throughout the entire incident. One time she told us it had no tail. The next time she said she thought it might have had one. I think I forgot to ask about the tail the last time she told the story. It seems she mainly saw it from the front, and for that reason, I'm not sure she would have seen the tail much, whether it was there or not. So there it is. A werewolf or dogman. It's gaining on them, getting closer and closer to their cart, and it has such a look of hatred on its face that Grandma said it was all she could do to keep from fainting. She's screaming at the guy to drive the horse faster. All of Grandma's family is screaming at the guy to go faster. Her mom and dad, and probably all her dead ancestors too. The theoretical idea of me was probably screaming at this guy too. After all, if Grandma got taken by a dogman, I wouldn't ever get to be born. So, in the cart, Grandma now saw the lights of the train station. The dogman did as well, and it ceased its chase, allowing them to rejoin their own kind. Grandma said it just melted back into the darkness as they approached civilization, and that was the last she ever saw it, or heard of it, or anything like it. I asked Grandma if this turned her off to show business or to accepting invitations from the audience. She said back in her day you didn't have the option of being turned off to something. Life was hard. If you had a traumatic experience in the woods, you went back out there the next day as though nothing had happened. If a member of the audience turned out to be a psycho, you were just as friendly to the next audience the next night. There was no other option. It was about survival. Didn't you know, she asked me, I met your grandfather when he was an audience member after one of my last shows. Now that is the real story of why I quit show business, not the werewolf story. The werewolf encounter was just another night in vaudeville. Trust me. Grandma might have preferred to put on a brave face about it, but she wouldn't have retold the story so many times if it hadn't been a shocking and memorable occurrence, as opposed to just another night in vaudeville. She was a tough old lady, but even my grandma would have been no match against the savagery of a feral dogman. We have a second Dogman story in a minute, so don't go away. I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY or 804-537-2279. An entire pack of Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. I'm fascinated by stories of Dogman because of this thing that happened to me when I was young that I'm about to tell you. But in almost all the stories, the Dogman acts alone. The one and only time I saw a Dogman, I think I saw 11 of them all at once. This is the story of that night. Okay, I was around 11, I guess. It was summer, New Jersey, 1970s. Hot, sweaty, boring. The internet hadn't been invented yet, etc. I was hanging with a buddy of mine, getting in trouble out at the edge of Chatham, and we ended up wandering, possibly illegally, into the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge. We loved it in there. It was like going back to the age of the dinosaurs. We saw weird birds and insects in there and joked around that Tyrannosaurus Rex and cavemen lived further into the park. Anyway, this one time we were in there, we stayed after it had started to get dark. We hadn't ever done that before, but we really had no sense of the possible dangers that exist after dark for two completely unprepared teenagers in a wildlife refuge. As it turns out, they call it wildlife for a reason. So anyway, my buddy and I are hanging out at a rock behind some trees on the edge of this grassy area that has a wall at one end, just a plain, nondescript wall. I can't tell what's on the other side. I'm not sure if it's a wall of a building or just a wall in the woods. I didn't think twice about it, but then I thought I saw some guy go over, lean on the wall, and light up a cigarette. I say I thought I saw this because I just noticed it peripherally. I was mainly talking to my friend and not paying attention to the wall beyond it. But I remember seeing the smoking guy because it made me think. That wall must be part of a business, and there's an employee taking a smoking break. It helped me define the odd wall, and that's why I remembered it. So then, after a while, out of the corner of my eye, I think I see a bear or a Bigfoot walk over to the cigarette-smoking guy. That immediately draws my attention, and I look directly at the scene. I motion for my buddy to be quiet and look as well. When I squint, I can see that it's not a bear, and it's not a Bigfoot. It's not a man either. It's a dog walking on its hind legs. At first I thought this meant it was a dog doing a trick, and I relaxed, thinking the mystery had been explained. But then my gaze drifted over to the cigarette-smoking fellow, and I saw that he was wearing a dog head mask. That really freaked me out, and I gasped loudly. I was afraid they heard me, so I ducked down behind the rock. We both did. Now we were facing away from the scene, and we were both thoroughly freaked out. I asked my buddy what kind of a nut job wears a dog mask in the woods. My buddy didn't think it was a mask. I started looking at him like he was on drugs or something, but he was shaking all over, and he was convinced we were looking at either werewolves or maybe native shamans or shapeshifters. We sat there silently, and I considered what he had said. Then, slowly, quietly, stealthily, I turned around to face the scene across the meadow again, and I took a peek. The smoking man was now joined by a few more standing dogs. I realize now that the man was not wearing clothes, and that he was, in fact, one of the standing dogs himself. I had thought he was wearing dark clothes, but that was his fur. This was a scene of madness and horror. I whispered to my friend, "What do we do?" He whispered back, "Let's watch them." And so, that's what we did. I'm not sure how long we were there, but it must have been something like 60 or 90 minutes. One by one, more dogmen arrived. They seemed to be separating into groups and having quiet conversations among themselves, although there were also one or two who I remember standing alone by themselves. This just continued and continued as the night came on, and the sky grew darker and darker and darker. There must have been 10 or 12 of them there by that point. And then, all at once, without any warning whatsoever, every one of those dogmen or werewolves or brujos or whatever they were ran off in a different direction. At lightning speed they erupted in all directions. Several of them were heading in our direction. I only remember running after that. I remember running like nothing else existed, like the only reason I was born was to run. I did not see my life flashing in front of my eyes. I was not going to die that day. I ran over, under, around, and through every part of that forest until we reached the edge of the wild area and escaped back to the land of the humans. I never looked back, and we were both lucky enough to have never seen those dogmen ever again. A couple or 3 days later, I was in a newsstand store in town, and there was a new comic book on the stands with a werewolf on the cover. We were both talking about where the artist got it right and where he got it wrong. One of the old guys in the store was laughing at us, this Native American guy. He asked why we thought we knew what real werewolves looked like. Being kids, we just told him. We saw them lining up by the wall in the woods before they went off to hunt. The old Native American guy stopped laughing at us, and he got this weird expression on his face. Finally, he told us that his father always said that the wall in the woods was a gathering place for bad spirits. He just assumed his father was going mental when he said stuff like that, but our story was sort of freaking him out. So, anyway, fast forward to the summer of 2014. My buddy and I decided on Facebook we would meet and try to relocate that old wall in the woods and take pictures of it. During the day this time. We're not as brave as we once were. Okay, so we met and we entered the forest, this time with GPS to help guide our way to where we thought the wall was. Short version of the story is that we never found that wall or even that meadow or pasture in our entire day of searching. Either we were looking in the wrong place or the wall's been taken down. It's possible we walked past the site several times without recognizing it, and it's also possible that we never got close to it. So really, all that I've got in the end is a story. I saw a gathering of dog-headed men at dusk. I saw them disperse. I don't know why either of these things happened or what any of it means. The only thing I know is that dogmen do have a social structure and they do communicate with each other. And that's the true story of the only time I ever saw Dogman. I saw Bigfoot disappear. Is told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ River. Dear Scary Stories, if this story doesn't make you think I'm crazy, then you might be crazy yourself. For that reason, I'm going to tell it to you anonymously. I live in a part of Pennsylvania that is quite rural. Although my family does not own much land, most of the other families around here live on farms. When we sit out in back of our house, we can hear cows mooing all evening in the distance. Our backyard is a squarish patch of grass surrounded by forest on 3 sides, which belongs to 2 different neighbors. I never understood exactly where the demarcation is between their properties, but I know the Smith family, not their real name, owns the forest to the east of us, and the Jones family, again, not their actual name, owns the forest to the west. Both families were friendly to us, and we were allowed use of the forest for playing in during the day. We were all warned, our parents included, to stay out of the forest at night. We were never told why, but we were told to keep out at night, and so we did. One summer in the mid-60s, we saw a number of glowing lights in the night sky on multiple occasions. My two brothers and I were certain they were flying saucers, but my parents each had different ideas. Mom thought they were helicopters, and Dad thought they were military craft of some sort. They seemed to hover over a spot, seemingly unmoving. That's why Mom thought they were choppers. Dad said sometimes if a flying vehicle heads directly towards you or directly away from you, it can appear to be stationary in space. These lights in the sky did not seem to have those blinking lights on them that are required on all private and commercial aircraft, so I'm not even certain they were actually aircraft themselves. They might have been early forms of drones or even some sort of natural phenomenon. We only ever saw lights. We did not actually ever clearly witness a vehicle attached to the lights. All I can say with certainty is that 2 or 3 nights a week, all summer long, we saw the lights dancing in the sky. We got used to them, and soon our friends from school would visit us at night to lay on the grass in the yard and watch the UFOs dancing over our property as June wore on. I remember we all got occupied getting ready for our big July 4th celebration, and either the flying lights didn't come by for a while, or we were just too busy to notice them. But then around the end of July or beginning of August, they came back in a big way. Only this time, they weren't just tiny lights dancing far overhead. This time their actions had physical, real-world consequences in our lives. For instance, one night, we had grilled hamburgers out back and were sitting around listening to a baseball game on the radio when static interfered with the broadcast. At the same time, the backyard became even hotter than it had already been, and we noticed the yard was brighter. Looking up, we could see the moon larger than it had ever seemed before and glowing a faint yellow color. My mother screamed when she saw it, and a few seconds later I did too, as the moon sped over the forest where it appeared to land. It was not the moon, it was one of those lights come down close to us. We all attended our mother and saw that she was okay. Then I wanted to head into the forest to see if I could find where that light had landed. Our father strictly forbade that and ordered us all into bed, even though it wasn't our bedtime yet. We were ordered to skip our baths and shower in the morning instead. Dad just wanted us in bed as fast as possible. So we did what any kid would do in that situation. We stalled for time. My brother walked over to his baseball glove and ball, picked up the ball and headed most of the way back in, and remembered he'd left the glove. Then he went back to get the glove. I remembered where I'd left my bat and wandered off to get it, right at the edge of the yard by the forest. My father yelled at me to hurry up. I stopped walking, turned around, and asked him to repeat what he had said. Angrily, he ordered me to hurry up. I informed him calmly that I had been hurrying, but he yelled at me, so I had stopped to find out what the yelling was all about, and now was no longer able to hurry. I suggested that it was easier to hurry without being interrupted, and asked to hurry when crash, crash, crash. Trees parted behind me, and I turned to look. I saw the largest man I'd ever seen in my life, or the silhouette of him at least. It was a mountain of a man, much taller than my father, who was the tallest man I'd ever seen in person. Much wider, too. I couldn't make out any features, only the dark shape. My father screamed again, but this time in horror and fear. The large man took a step out of the forest and now loomed directly over me. It was a hairy gorilla-type creature standing upright and holding a snow globe that was lit from inside. The giant man looked me in my eyes, then into the glowing orb, then back at me. He or she lowered the orb, then opened its mouth, and in a piercingly loud voice began to cry like a baby. Like an infant that needs milk or just wet itself. Speaking of which, that is what I myself did at that particular moment. I remember dropping to my knees and spots appearing at the edges of my vision, my pant legs getting warmer. I remember the creature's red eyes staring into mine as though asking some question I couldn't understand. I remember my father shouting and running closer to me from behind. The creature's eyes went from me to the direction my father was coming from. Then he or she just vanished, as in ceased to be there in front of me any longer, completely gone. Had I imagined it? Was this a dream? My father, out of breath, grabbed me and carried me in his arms to the house, almost falling a couple times on the way back. He kept asking me what it did to me, but I could only remember that it cried like a baby. I think it wanted a bottle, I suggested. I have enclosed a sketch I did a few years afterwards of what I remembered the monster looking like. We never saw it again, and we stopped looking for the lights in the sky completely after that. Dad said the more you think about them, the more they think about you, so we made a family pact to think about them as little as possible. It's my advice for you too. Don't go looking for trouble, because this kind of trouble will come back and look for you. Bigfoot in My Bedroom is told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ River. Dear Scary Stories, I am a 25-year-old, fully employed, dues-paying member of the Carpenters Union, but this story happened around a dozen years ago when I was still a kid. I had grown up in a pretty large city in an apartment in a big building. When I was 13, my parents split up, and I went with my father to live in a house near the woods on the outskirts of a tiny town. I didn't just lose my mom, but all my friends at the same time. I've reacquainted myself with a few of them since then via Facebook, but most of the kids I just never saw again. Since our personal lives had become nightmares, this creepy house seemed the perfect place to live at the time. It looked haunted from a distance, and it looked like the Munsters' home inside. The forest behind it wasn't one of those pretty ones you want to wander through. It was a jungle with snakes, swamps, and even quicksand like in old movies. I didn't even know that was a real thing until we moved down south to this house. Everything about the place screamed horror movie. I don't remember exactly when I first started seeing shadows moving in my bedroom at night, but it was one of the first nights we stayed there. The next morning, my father told me I was just seeing shadows of animals walking around outside my window. That night, he pulled my shade down and installed a new nightlight, and of course, that only allowed me to see the shadows moving on the walls more clearly. There were definitely intelligently motivated, apparently living creatures in my room that appeared to me as shadows. It looked almost as though light were being projected from over my head and behind me onto the wall in front of me, and that something in between those 2 points was interrupting the flow of light and making shadows appear on the far wall, except none of that was happening. Each night after that, I would see the moving shadows for at least a little while. Sometimes it would just be for a few seconds and they'd calm down and let me get some sleep. Other nights, the darkness would twitch and shudder and do everything it could to keep me awake for what felt like hours. Over the course of months, the shadows began to join together more and more until there was only one shadow, and it was generally man-shaped. It would usually seem to be observing me from the corner of the room. Eventually, I grew used to falling asleep with it staring at me or seeming to. Soon, I found myself waking up in the night and seeing it still there. And then one night, it walked out from the shadows. The shadow itself walked out of its own shadow and I saw this thing that looked like Bigfoot standing there, looking back at me. It was so tall that its head nearly touched the ceiling. It was so dark that I couldn't make out features, but it appeared to be shaggy all over. Its eyes glowed and pulsed in an almost hypnotic way. I tried to pull my eyes away and saw that I could, so I don't think I was actually being hypnotized. The Bigfoot walked to the foot of my bed and stared at me with its pulsing eyes. I saw movement outside my window, and there was a strange man standing there, or at least the face of a man. It was staring at the Bigfoot and grinning. It looked like a man, but its eyes were too far apart. It noticed I was looking at it and disappeared. Then, the apparent Sasquatch at the foot of my bed disappeared as well. I never saw any of these things again. And as I previously stated, I'm an adult now, holding down a responsible job, but these experiences definitely shaped my view of the world and of the paranormal or strange. I hear people arguing about Bigfoot, and arguing about ghosts, and arguing about UFOs, and to me, it seems they need to stop arguing and start listening to each other. They may all be chasing the same wild goose. I know what you're asking in your head. Are you saying that shadow men are really Bigfoot? Not exactly. But I am saying that what people sometimes perceive as Bigfoot and other times perceive as shadow men or ghosts may in fact have the same or similar origin points. In other words, the same phenomena might be perceived in different ways at different times by different points of consciousness. Or, in simpler terms, there's no such thing as Bigfoot or shadow people. There's only whatever it is that shows itself to us as Bigfoot or shadow people, and that might be the greatest mystery of all. Is Bigfoot a ghost? As told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. Dear Scary Stories, when I was a kid, I used to see monsters. Or at least I would see one monster. I couldn't tell if it was the same one or a different one, as they were always pretty far away and always in at least partial darkness, and each sighting or encounter would end the same way. The entity would begin to move into the light where I could get a better view of it, and as it did so, it would literally disappear from sight. In our family, this creature or form was known as the Hay Man. Supposedly that was the name I myself gave it when I was 3 years old and reported its presence to my family for the first time. I suspect I was trying to say hairy man and not Hay Man, but I don't actually remember, so I just don't know. Either way, Hay Man is the name that stuck, so it's the name I will use for the telling of this story. It was not a creature made of hay, however. It was a hairy, tall, ape-like man with bright red eyes that were either lit from within or else reflected light like bicycle reflectors. Nobody else saw the Hay Man except me, and so it became a family joke, just another weird thing about me for all of them to poke fun at. They were actually pretty supportive even in their joking, so it didn't drive me to depression or make me feel left out. They decided I was the family weirdo, but they liked having a family weirdo, so I don't remember being bothered playing the role. One night, when I was 11 or 12, my brother was playing me a game at the lawn table on the patio behind the house. We kept hearing weird sounds from the forest, and so finally we turned out the patio lights and let our eyes adjust to the darkness to see what was out there. By the light of the moon, I saw the hay man. I didn't feel like getting made fun of that night, so I didn't say anything. My brother, however, gasped. Whispering, he exclaimed in my ear, "Bigfoot!" And he pointed directly toward the hay man, who did not seem to notice us yet. I guess he did sort of look like a Bigfoot now that I thought about it, but I had, for some reason, never made that connection before. Whispering back, I asked my brother, "You can see him?" Realizing that was a stupid question, I immediately added, "That's the hay man," and my brother's head jerked back to stare at me in shock. His expression was saying, either the hay man is real, or now I've gone insane like my older brother. We both looked back at the creature, and it realized it was being watched for the first time. Turning to stare directly at us, the red eyes lit up brightly. My brother gasped, then gasped again as the creature took one step toward us and vanished. We climbed over each other in our haste to get inside and lock all the doors and windows. When we got inside, the family wanted to know what was wrong, but my brother said nothing was wrong. He was just tired and going to bed early. He dragged me away with him and begged me to promise that I'd never tell the rest of the family that he saw the hay man too. We argued. Then negotiations got serious, and he agreed to be my slave for life in exchange for my silence. This lasted all of 3 days before it dawned on him that if I ever said he saw the monster too, he could just deny it and call me a liar on top of being crazy. He realized he held all the power as long as he was willing to deny. It should surprise none of you that he now works in local politics in a different state. I saw the hay man 2 more times over the next 2 summers before my parents sold that property and we moved to New York City. If Bigfoot lived here, he'd have his body waxed and you wouldn't know if his eyes glowed red because everyone here wears shades. All joking aside, I'm 99% certain I've never seen another hairy ape man since. There is a bouncer at a certain local club that the jury is still out on, though. All of my Bigfoot or Sasquatch experiences happened in my childhood, finishing, I guess, when I was 14. All of them, as in every single one of them, ended with the creature either vanishing or becoming invisible in front of my eyes. For this reason, I do not think of Sasquatch as a race of gorilla-like creatures. I do not think they are an undiscovered species of primate. I have a few different theories, each of which make more or less sense to me on different days, but I almost never am in a headspace wherein I can conceive of them as a species of normal primates. If they are that, then they must be primates, either coming here through time tunnels or interdimensional portals. I am not a huge fan of those kind of theories, but some of my friends think this explains my stories. Some days, I think they are phantoms of creatures that once roamed the earth. That would explain why they vanish like ghosts. Since they always make eye contact before disappearing, I would class them as intelligent hauntings, if indeed that is what they are. Other days, I think they are not vanishing, but becoming invisible. Perhaps in spite of their primitive outward appearance, they are actually an advanced race of some kind. What if they have the technology to make themselves appear invisible to us? That would explain why it always seemed to happen right after it noticed it was being watched. By calling them an advanced species, it sounds like I'm implying they're from outer space, but what if they are just an ancient species from right here on Earth? What if they are as old or older than the human race, with equal or greater mental capacity? I just read somewhere in National Geographic saying that humans only inhabit 5% of the Earth. Why could an intelligent species not share the planet with us and deliberately keep itself hidden? A species that perhaps evolved its mental abilities to the same extent that we've developed our technological abilities. Or maybe my brother and I both suffered some kind of mass hallucination. It seems to me the moral of the story is this. Hey man, give plenty of space to the Hey Man.
Come back for more scary stories.